Kia ora koutou, whaasalo whātu. Welcome to this session titled Art and Activism. My name is Lana Lopesi and I am honoured to chair this discussion today. Should we move forward, Nikki? So this is the community code. So if you could just, take a read of this and abide by these cues as you're sort of engaging in this talanoa or kōrero today. And we would love to engage in conversations with you all. So please do feel free to put your questions and your comments in the chat, and we will, with the help of our amazing moderator Olsen, try our best to make sure we include everyone and everything today. Cool, so we'll just kick in. So again, just to start again, my name is Dianne Lopesi and I'm honoured to chair this conversation between Dianne Jones and Linda Munn. Unfortunately, Tawera Tahuri is unable to join us tonight, so I just want to send my apologies on Tawera's behalf, although maybe we'll get a spot appearance. We'll just see how we go. And I especially want to thank you all for joining us on your Friday nights. Tonight we'll discuss a range of topics around art and activism, including Aboriginal and Indigenous perspectives within the arts, truths and untruths, popular nationhood ideologies, and the way in which art practice can reinforce tino rangatiratanga and sovereignty of Native nations. How we'll run this session is that Linda and then Dianne will each speak themselves, introduce themselves, and sort of discuss their notions of art and activism, and then we'll go into a conversation and see where things lead us. I have a heap of questions myself that I'd love to ask these esteemed panelists, but please do also feel free to engage with them and respond. So shall we get started, Linda? Can I throw to you? Could you introduce yourself and also tell us about your art and activism and how those are one and the same for you? Kia ora.
Kia ora, Lana. Tēnā koutou katoa. Ko Kaikōrero te maunga, ko waitao te awa, ko matatua te waka, ko ngā pōta ki te iwi, ko romai nohorangi i te tupuna whare. And I also whakapapa to Ngāti Manu and Ngāpuhi and Te Awa Ngāi Tahu. Kia ora and thank you all for coming. I promise to behave myself because those who know me well will be laying bets, I'm sure. But art and activism, like Māori, we don't have a word for art. And we have contemporary versions like mahi toi, which is to make, work. But because I see that, art is a kind of a Western construct, it has to be put into something, whereas we, from a Māori worldview, because we didn't have a written language, our language was through visual and oratory gifts. Ask me a question. I'm better if you ask me a question. I'm looking at our questions here. Okay. But I see that hang on, I've got it. That relationship between art and activism. I think that as a Māori, everything stems from whakapapa. You're nothing without your whakapapa and your connection back to the land, to the universe. So everything we do is a response to that. Yeah.
Do you want to tell us about how you sort of got into, or when you sort of started making art and
I always wanted to be an artist since I was a kid. I don't know why. Even started doing little homemade tattoos on my knee. I don't know why. It wasn't until I went to 3 art schools and found out why. They're being all Western art schools, but it was still a good learning journey. And being in a wānanga space with my peers, it kind of just strengthened why I am Māori, and that I make work that is not visually Māori. Because I paint dead people, so I don't care. But so I don't do predominantly Māori symbolism or anything. I just do what I want to do, basically. But it does come from a place of tikanga and whakapapa, and But I think being Māori and being an artist in Aotearoa, we have such a huge collective, and we're quite diverse in how we make art. Whether we you know, because we have whakairo, the traditional arts of whakairo, rāranga, kōwhaiwhai, and taonga pūoro. But then we come in, we've adapted, and we're using so many more new materials and technology. So the tikanga remains the same, but the materials have evolved. So it's just let us loose, you know, like there's the works. In my own work, I've come back to painting, where I started out as a carver and a sculptor. And it's only because someone told me I had to specialize in one thing. So I decided to go and learn 3 more, you know, just, yeah. But I don't know if you know that I was one of the designers in the group who designed the tino rangatira flag. So that's part of my legacy and the legacy of our crew in the movement. Because I left school, went to a Pākehā school in Christchurch, left there, accidentally fell into the Black women's movement. Best move I ever made. I didn't realise I was Māori. So I learned so much from those wahine and just in general around the movement and Springbok and just hikoi, you know, huge history. And that's kind of impacted on my work. And so years ago, the work was pretty brutal. It was in your face, smash you like a sledgehammer. Now I'm a bit more gentle, so it's a bit more underlying the work, but you look at it long enough and it just smashes you still in the head. So, you know, makes a statement. I'm not apologising for it either. I think we've been doing that for too long, you know, around trying to save our people. Yeah. But I do have this thing that I always say is like, when you're born Indigenous, you're born into the service of your people. And that's what you do. Everything you do is to keep the whakapapa strong, no matter what. It's like being a soldier. You go to war, you do what it takes to defend your people, your country, your culture. My 10 minutes up yet?
I'm sure you'd love it, but can I just ask one more question? Because I'm sure a lot of people listening would love to know more about that tino rangatira flag and
of course
the
they
story behind that. Could you share with us?
So the tino rangatira kara came about when our whānau in the far north, Te Kaweriki, actually it was Hilda and Jan. It was a group, really strong wahine. We just like, you know, maybe we need something to bring Māori a bit more united, you know, since we're all trying to fight for the same thing, trying to gain back our land, our culture, keep our people alive. So Te Kaweriki decided to run a flag competition for Māori. She designed a flag that is inherently visually Māori. And there weren't many who actually participated. So from the north, Hiraina Marsden actually came up with the first kind of draft of it on a piece of, on a serviette, which I love telling that story because it's so her. And then it was kind of, it was looked at, it was, yeah, worked on for quite a while until we came up to the, with the design that you see now. But there was so many people behind that design, whether it was the kaupapa, whether it was just a bit, yeah. And a lot of them aren't here anymore. They're not with us anymore. But it wasn't just wahine. We had all our tāne there. Paua Eustage was responsible for the underlying kaupapa that sits underneath that kara, underneath the tino. So yeah, just so many people. Just the 3 of us, our names were well, we kind of all tweaked that thing, that flag. So so we all had a hand in it, and as just one of the last designers, I suppose, breathing, And I was the younger one. Yeah, you know, I was the pōtiki. So you just did what you were told to do. Then I did, not anymore. But and so I don't think we ever imagined that it would become what it has become. It's a bit overwhelming. So yeah. Yeah, that's our legacy for our future, our mokopuna and their mokopuna. So yeah, there's a lot more. You could write a book on that, on the tino haki. So yeah.
Thank you. There is just a question that's come through on that from Carter Bradley, who is asking where we can buy legit tino rangatira tangahaki from, sold by Māori and not $2 shops. Not sure if you have anything on that.
Yeah, that's a whole other kōrero too, which we're working on at the moment, is to try and, the trouble is when they're made here, it's so expensive. And my thing is that, I mean, $100 for a flag, you know, that's a lot of people's kai. That's kai for your table. So working on a way so that our people can afford a flag that's made here in Aotearoa. But at the same time, the Chinese flags don't bother me as much as they used to. Like, I don't want to burn down their shops anymore, you know, because if our people, if $5 is all they have and they want to get a tino flag, that'll do for now. It means they can still fly it from their house. They can fly it proudly. Just don't wear it on your ass. That's the only thing I'll say. You know, have it, yeah. So, yeah, we're working on that, and because it's been exploited so much, not just by overseas, either by people here in this country who are trying to lay claim to it, which Te Kawariki, we're taking care of that as well.
Well, thank you, Linda. I think if people out there have more questions for Linda, just pop them in the chat and the Q&A, and maybe in the meantime we can move to you, Dianne.
Hey.
Oh, sorry, Dianne, you're on mute. Dianne, you there? Sorry, we can't hear you.
How's that? Am I back?
Good, you're back.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry that I went after Linda. That was amazing. That's incredibly interesting. It just wants me to hear more. What I'm going to talk about is being a young Aboriginal child, country Western Australia, and seeing images like this in books. And this is kind of what started me on my journey. It's, you know, I would look at these and I would think, who are these guys? Why is there no resistance? Is this, who's telling the story? So I always think, who's telling the story? What are they trying to say? And who is their audience? So I don't think I'm their audience, because when I talk to some of my ancestors, we're talking about a huge amount of resistance and it never gets heard. And so I think, okay, I go to the galleries, I hear this story, I see this story. And then when I go looking at some of these really famous Australian artworks, these two guys are still here. So they're up here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, they're here. And right over here in the corner. And I'm thinking, okay, these two guys, they were pretty busy because they were obviously the only two guys that were around protecting the shores. Or if I look at this story, I don't see the people arriving in the boat. They don't look scared. They look like they're going, oh yeah, there's a few people there, but no, let's not worry. Let's just keep going. So it erases the history of frontier wars. So I think, well, how many times do I hear this story growing up, and at what point do I start to question it? And I start to say, hang on, I know that more happened here. And so I started putting my face into these images. This was an old album, and it was of colonial people who, throughout this album, they didn't really care. It was on the side of the street. And I started flicking through it, and I was looking at the dates and I was looking at the locations, and they were near some of the places that I grew up and some of the photo studios, and they were 1800s to 1930s. And I thought for sure these people had seen frontier violence, but they're posing in this photo to send maybe back to England to say, you know, oh, it's lovely down here. Why don't you pop in for a visit one day? And I know for a fact that with my particular group, in 1840, there was approximately 6,000 in our small group. By 1901, there were 900 left of us. And that's a huge amount of people that were massacred. If they had succeeded, I would not be here talking. So it's quite humbling to be looking back through these history books and to be reading. I spend a lot of time looking back at this and trying to make something that kind of talks about what are they seeing? How can they be doing this? And I like this idea of embodiment. And I like the idea of using male as well as female. So I can't spend a lot of time on one because I've got 10 minutes. And so I was looking at like the famous painters like John Glover, and he goes average and he's dancing at Brighton. There's no one really talks about the fact that he couldn't have seen this because in Brighton in Tasmania, this is a massacre site already. He's painting this fantasy. His audience isn't the ancestors of some of these people or some of the people who know these stories. This is like, oh yeah, they were down there and they were having fun. And if I don't ever hear another version of this story and know that there is a different story, I'm looking at this and believing this. I'm thinking, oh, this is a fantastic painting. This is in the art gallery. So I decided to put an Aboriginal family, which is my family, in this. And so that's me in the middle. So I use a lot of my family, use myself as an embodiment and say, well, this is what I see as an Aboriginal person. This is an old one from the 70s, so I'm much younger then. And I'm showing my age because, but with this particular image, I often get told, well, it doesn't really work. You don't look like an Aboriginal family, you look like a white family. And so that begins those discussions because you only have one idea of what an Aboriginal person looks like, but we have been removed from our lands. We are not allowed to go back, and we go back to farmers and we say, we know there are sacred sites here and we need to tell the kids and we need to hear them and then we need to pass them on. So if the farmer feels like it, he will give us permission. But if he doesn't, he will call the police and remove us for trespassing. But these are our lands that were never ceded. So it doesn't matter what we say. Those farmers aren't moving. We don't have access to those lands unless the farmer feels like it. So it's quite a frustration to look at these paintings and to see these untruths. It's the same with the Shearing the Rams, which is very famous in Australia, Tom Roberts, which is this whole fantasy idea of Australia was built on the back of shearers. I wish I had more time to talk a lot about these ones. So I decided to put my dad and my brother in that image. When I'm putting them in that image, or even when I'm embodying these images, I'm not saying this is now my image. I'm saying that is your version, that's your story, that's what you're saying, but this happened too. My dad was a gun shearer. What makes a gun shearer is somebody who shears over 200 sheep a day. And he said he didn't plan on being a gun shearer, but the amount of racism that he dealt with in the shed just meant that he just put his head down and got better and better and better at. And so he started entering competitions. And of course, in the 50s and 60s, he would win competitions, but he was never invited to the winner's dinner. So I said to him, I don't know how, how does that work? You don't get to go, but you won. And he goes, well, at the end of the day, I won. So I go with that knowledge. But then it's like with those paintings, the repetition of us being erased and the repetition of one story being told, and then the repetition of you being denied just the basic thing of celebrating your win only because of the fact that your color of your skin. So I started looking at photographers And, you know, I think these are iconic Australian images, Max Dupain. And what I do is I just put myself in them because I think, well, that same beach, Bondi, I've been there, and I've spent a lot of time in Western Australia on the beaches, and we have a long history with this. But if I look at all of Max Dupain's or all of these kind of images from 30s and 40s that are iconic Australian images, I don't see any Aboriginal faces. And I know that for a really big reason why is that there was segregation in Western Australia. You could be Aboriginal and be arrested after 6 p.m. for being Aboriginal and on the street. So you might go to the beach, but you would be monitored. There would be certain places you weren't allowed to go. So I just want to change this idea, because we did go to the beach in the 70s and 80s and really enjoyed it, and know that this is, you know, something that shouldn't be denied just because you're Aboriginal. Like, why? It's mind-boggling that these things can just, I think the hardest thing is the silence, because nobody says, oh, this isn't your land anymore. They just don't let you on. And if you try to go on the land, you will get arrested, and you will talk and talk and talk, and nobody does anything, you know. So I think it was really important to make these works, and a lot of these works is about talking to my relatives and my parents and family and ancestors, and I'm really aware that I don't ever want to make anything, you know, that would ever not make them feel okay. I thought it was really important that I didn't make work that made me, you know, I can tell a sad story. I know 100 of them, thousands of them, I should say. But what if we just try to change what that representation looks like? What if I see Black faces more commonly in these kind of images that isn't about a Black face being in an image? It's just someone on the beach, and that's about it. So a lot of those works, this is a lot of the ideas that I had between that. So these are original kind of artworks from the 1930s, and I've put photographs. So I've, you know, just dressed in the costumes and put myself in them to have an Aboriginal face. And these works were really made about the fact that Christianity plays a huge part on the missions and the reserves with my ancestors. Mum and Dad left the reserve in the late 60s, early 70s, and they were very excited about getting into a house in the town and not being arrested after 6 o'clock. These works were in response to, they're born again Christians, so they're really quite extreme, and they have had such a strong relationship with the missionaries on the reserves and the missions. And I kept saying, but this isn't our religion. This is not our beliefs, you know. And they said, oh yes, but they were lovely to us. And the missionaries said to us, you know, if they hadn't have come, we would have all gone to hell. And I'm going, well, you're talking about 60, 70, 80,000 years of Aboriginal people in hell. I mean, it's I couldn't understand what the logic was with that this isn't our religion, and that they were systematically destroying who we are and who we were by our religion. So they were told that Dreamtime was from the devil, and they, in such a way that they were really spooked by it. So they were like, we've been fooled for so long. And I made these works because it was really this idea of, you know, we want you to be a good Christian, and you know, the missionaries were great. We really loved them. Whenever we wanted something in town, they'd go and get it for us. It's like, well, yeah, because you weren't allowed to go yourself, unless you had a form that you signed and you were given permission by the Native Welfare Officer. So, you know, their stories are fascinating, but I also think there's, you know, I don't really argue with them, because I hear their stories and I can't imagine what it would have been like for me to be there. So I have to think about what that means. So these are people that I love. But that really got me to thinking about who my role models were. And I'm thinking about you know, the movies, the matinee movie in the 70s and the 80s, which was Elvis and Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn, and I've done a few other ones, James Dean, and but it was like, it seemed so unrealistic. And I thought, wow, what if I saw one of my aunties like that, or one of my uncles, or some glamorous Noongar person who was dressed up. So we're being moved into the dominant culture, but we're not allowed to exist as who we are. And we're also being denied so much. And I thought, well, you know, so we don't get to have these photos of ourselves. We don't get to, and if we do, it's kind of like, well, who are you trying to be, a white person? And it's like, well, no, but, you know, you're not still dressed in convict clothes. So that doesn't really make sense. That, you know, societies change. We're now in this dominant culture. How do we exist in this and feel good about ourselves? Still keeping our culture, but it doesn't mean that these movies don't have this incredible effect on us. I'm going to try not to talk too long. And this is why I did my nieces and nephews in the Mona Lisa. So I did a series of those, and I got them to think about, with the Mona Lisa, that it was like this mystery, and I was like, have this question in your eyes that you want to, that you know something that I could never know. And so I did that with that series. There's a lot more to all of these works. So this is just like the simple version, the quick version. This is some of the works that I made when I did my master's. You can probably find my master's online. I did it at Victoria College of Arts, VCA, and in Melbourne. And it was, I won't even go into it because it's quite a long story, but it was about going back to where I knew where there were massacre sites, but I'm taking photos of my niece. And we're in these memories of location. Of course, I'm not telling my niece this is what we're doing, because at some point she will actually get to hear these stories and understand them. But as long, for the time that she has innocence, is incredibly important. So we walked around these areas, and the fascinating thing about really falling into this work with my master's, which was the first murder of a white woman by 2 Aboriginal men in my hometown in Western Australia, was I actually found massacre sites that hadn't even been registered but had been remembered by the elders. And so they're saying, oh yeah, down there, we don't go there anymore, but that's one of the sites. And so I started to really think about, this needs to be recorded. Like, this is, you know, it's going as each generation gets older. And this particular work, it's that thing of making this work Kaikōrero, which is the name of a dance party that was put on by Aboriginal people for Aboriginal people. And I've taken photos of my mum and my dad, who were together after 60 years together, and they met at this club. So I thought, well, to remember this place, the Kaikōrero Club, there was a big thing for it in Western Australia. So I took these photos for them. The final one, Kaikōrero York Quick Stepping, is actually about the that they had to be off the streets by 6 o'clock. And I said, but, you know, obviously the dance went on till 8 or 9. And they said it was the only night of the, you know, that the police would turn a blind eye as long as you went straight home and you didn't go out to dinner or you didn't go anywhere else. I'm actually working on my PhD at the moment, and it's actually about my grandfather, who in 1955, he was an ex-soldier. This is his photo from the prison. He spent 14 years in Pentridge Prison for shooting a man in Melbourne. So I live really close to Pentridge Prison, so I'm often spending a lot of time there. We grew up with this story that, you know, Granddad shot this man, but what we remembered about this story, what I remember about this story was Granddad shot a racist. And I was like, yay, Granddad shot a racist. And then when I got to do my master's, a PhD, I was thinking, what is that story? So I started reading it, and I was thinking, is this the repetition thing? Is it the fact that he went to war, he was meant to get land, he was meant to get, you know, compensated for war, and he comes back and he doesn't have anything, and he meets, you know, it's not like he's met the racists for the first time. We meet them all the time. But at what point, and so this is what my PhD is going to be about, is at what point does he pull the trigger and say, I've had enough? Because when my dad, who's 80, he gets pulled up by the police constantly, and they check his car. And I say, when do you get sick of being pulled over by the police? And he says, if I say something, I might end up in jail. So I say nothing. And I say, but you're 80. Your whole life is this. And so now my PhD is, did he just go, I'm sick of racism? Is this what happened? And is that the reason he spent 14 years in prison? So I haven't finished the PhD yet. And I'll just end with, so these are some of the weights I made for it, to just kind of, lest we forget, that he actually was a war hero, in fact, and he had the medals to prove it. I'll end with this series, which is, I got to do a residency at Perth Parliament House, and they invited me in to make a series of works. I was really struck by the fact that they would invite me in to talk about Western Australia Parliament House, because I thought this is the place that made all the rules for my people, you know. First thing I noticed is that there were men in every photograph on the wall, in every frame. The only time I got to see women in this was in opposite the toilet, so that's where that photo is. And I like this idea too of embodying women and men. So me as the man is looking at the woman going, what are you doing here? One of the things with women for a very long time in Parliament House in Perth weren't allowed to use. So when I say the toilets, it was the men's toilet. So they would have to walk home, and run back to work because there were no toilets in the whole place for women. So this is a really interesting space to go in. I think it's a fantastic project that the Parliament House in Perth has started. So they invite an artist every year to come in and talk about Parliament House in whatever they want to say. So I really noticed the only place that they had women's representation was in the corner in the library, but the whole gardens everywhere is magnificent mud busts of men. And so I was really struck by how male this place was and how much tradition was recognised. I'll end with this one. So this was where I thought, wow, so this is the very room where they were making decisions about whether we are citizens or not, whether we get to walk around the streets after 6 p.m, where we get sent to, who is giving the Native Affairs officers more rights over us to decide, you know, what happens to us. I've managed to obtain boxes and boxes of my family's records from the Native Welfare Officers. To give an example, with my grandmother, there's one report in there saying she is walking down William Street smoking a cigarette. And I'm thinking, it was as though Aboriginal people were spies. We're walking down the street having a cigarette. I mean, I get to see a picture of, oh, yes, so she was down there at that date and that time. But I can follow all of my grandparents, great-grandparents and parents from reading these files. And the thing that disturbs me the most is the voice in which they're told to, that I read. So I always have to have this filter when I'm reading my own history that hasn't been written by me or by my people, but it's been written by voices that are sometimes actually traumatizing to read. So I'll end there because I've got more, but yeah, I just wanted to end with that. And so before I finish, one thing I did want to say was, what if there was an Aboriginal person sitting in every one of those seats, from the clerks who are see no evil, hear no evil, speak no evil, to the Minister of Arts falling asleep with his blue shirt and red tie, to what sort of decisions would they have made if there was if it wasn't every seat, if there was one Aboriginal person in there who said, no, we don't think it is good to treat people as a group with the way that they did. So, yeah, I'll take screen share off. So, yeah, sorry, hopefully that was not too long.
Do not apologise. That was brilliant.
That was awesome.
I'm feeling very heavy in like the best and then the worst way, I suppose. I was really inspired by your work, but you know, the stuff that you're dealing with is not easy or light by any means. There are lots of questions coming into the Q&A, and I want to give you both a chance to engage with our audience. So coming to you, Linda. Rebecca Graham has thanked you for your kōrero and has asked, I'll just quote this. You mentioned in your intro about not knowing you were Māori until you became involved with Black women. Can you share some more of your journey of learning your connections with being Māori, and perhaps what some of the core key events or interactions that spoke to you were on this haerenga were?
Oh, kia ora. I think because my dad was a soldier in the army, that's a culture all of its own. It's another story. We were never taught that we were Māori. My mum was in the kapahaka group, which is just some tokenistic, you know, I was going to say a bad word there, but I'll behave. I think it was just little moments, you know, when I reflect on it, looking back about how we were treated, even, you know, and this is like the 70s, late 60s, going to school, you know, and it's that kind of passive thing where, yeah, oh, you know, you just ignore it and carry on, being bullied, being having racist taunts. I did beat up some boys because they were picking on my two little brothers, you know, when we were, well, I think I was 10. And it's the kind of stance I've had ever since. But I think I left school when I was nearly 18, and that was in Christchurch, and went to Tauranga and lived with my grandparents for a little while. And I ended up in Auckland working at Nestle's packing soup. Yeah, it wasn't a career. It was the last time I ever worked in a factory, but I met somebody who worked at Nestle's, and I met his sisters, and they introduced me to a whole another world where, you know, we had these really strong wahine. I'd never seen them except for my grandmother, you know, who could arm wrestle anybody, but it was just a totally different, it was a huge culture shock to meet people like Hilda Harawira, Hokiat Harawira, and then even Hene Whare Harawira. Just really, really awesome, the Leaf sisters. So I learned lots. I sat in a corner, I watched, and I learned, you know, that being somebody's, being abused or being used as somebody's, you know, whatever, wasn't normal. So learned really young, and ended up back living up in Kaitaia, where I joined Kaweriki, and we'd been on hikoi since 80s. But yeah, it's huge, a huge story. But yeah, what was the question?
The question was if you could share some more of your journey and learning your connections with being Māori, especially in your involvement with Black women.
I think I was really excited when I found out I was Māori. See, my father was an orphan, so and he'd been whāngai up in the north, but I had been on hikoi and had gone past my own marae for years until Uncle Māori Marston and Manos Nathan told me where I was from, what my whakapapa was. I think that was the most liberating moment in my life, and I've never forgotten it, being able to connect where we always felt like we didn't belong anywhere, me and my siblings. So to find out that we came from a really respected hapu tribe, was really, really awesome. And then people would say, that's why you're so arrogant, Linda. That's where it comes from. No, I was born that way. Sorry. But no, and to this day, I'm so proud to be Māori, and a Māori woman, a Māori man, mother, shit stirrer, artist, whatever you want me to be, I'll be, except colonized.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I loved your stories, Dianne.
Thanks.
And you know what? It just reminds me, and probably my colleagues and peers, of how courageous we all still need to be, and how to just kick it in the teeth, like, and say it straight. I don't know how to do I don't know how to be other than being straight. And then I live in Tauranga, biggest racist town in Aotearoa. You know what? I love living here. Do you know why? Because I'm a constant reminder to them that your shit stinks like the rest of us, and that we're not going to roll over. We're going to stand on our land. We're slowly getting back some of our land, and making housing for our own people, and but I won't. Your presentation was just a big reminder of why we do this, why we are who we are, for all of us. So kia ora for that, Dianne.
Yeah, no worries. Because, I look at my parents and my grandparents and I hear my stories from my ancestors, and there's a lot of grief, and that comes to me too,
Yeah.
And
it's that generational trauma, We've had like in Taranaki, where our old people and our babies and mamas were herded into a church, and that church was lit on fire. What kind of mental psycho does that shit? Colonizer, in the name of colonization, still don't quite understand how people can be so cruel to each other and still do it.
Yeah, it's weird. It's very weird.
Yeah. But
and I think that's why those stories, everyone's got a story. It just depends what your story is. So our story, I think we just don't get heard as much.
Oh, we carry that grief, and we're lucky as artists that that's our place that we put it. That's why I paint. I should have done a presentation, been a grown-up about it, but I didn't know. I told you I was going to wing it, and I'm winging it. Next one, Dianne. Oh, it's just like you and I having coffee.
That's right.
But I think that grief is what drives us, and it drives us to have things better for our people all around, and to tell our stories, because they're all similar. As First Nations, as indigenous, as mana whenua, our stories are all too similar, and they're still in denial. Those pockets of you still have these pockets of the good old white boys who believe that, oh no, that didn't happen, bullshit. To this day we have it in this town. So I love being a constant reminder, and I love it that our people are, to remind them what a bunch of assholes they all are. And they're all going to die soon, because Tauranga is like the waiting room to heaven. They build all these rest homes and stuff, but one day that tsunami's just going to come in and cleanse it, and all the Māori will be sitting up on the hills.
Right. But it's that feeling when we continue to tell our stories, and we do whatever we can to make sure they're heard, because they are erased. I feel like my stories, there's this constant effort to erase our stories, or to tell us, well, that's the past, we're moving on.
Get over it.
And you just go, well, how can you say that when you don't know your own history here? You're walking these lands, but you don't know the history here, and so I think this is incredibly important that, it's interesting that I get taught that in school, but I don't get taught about activism. I don't get taught about artists that are doing this incredible work. I don't get taught about people who are protesting, people who have different ideas about what it means to talk about whiteness and not be shut down. How that every day when I leave my house, I'm in a white world. The majority of people are not me. And so the shops, everywhere I go, it's the dominant culture. So when I go home, I'm just me. That's fine. But I live like this every day, and I will live like this every day because it's not going to change in Australia. But if we keep waiting for, telling the kids the stories, and
that's how you do it.
Justice will. Maybe not in my lifetime, I don't know.
I like to think that every time as an Indigenous person, as mana whenua, every time we walk out onto our land, we're claiming space. We're actually walking in the footsteps of our tūpuna and giving them the fingers, giving everyone the fingers. It's like, I'm trying so hard to behave myself. My mates will be laughing. I know this, but it's like I love walking into white spaces. I love it. I like walking into by myself. I don't care because you know what? I have my moko kauai. I have my grandmothers. I have the backbone of my nans, and I have their bolshy or bougie ways. It's like, no, I'm claiming this space and I'll stand in here. Yeah. I've had people move away and not sit next to me because I've sat somewhere. So I've just taken up all the seats and enjoyed myself. But that hurt. I thought, this is 2019, whatever it was, and this shit's still going on.
Yeah.
But held my head high, watched what I was doing, and then got up and walked out like a queen, which we all are.
Yeah.
Because I don't care. But that really hurt me, and I will never let anyone do that to me again. So, we claim the space every time we walk on this whenua, on this land, on this earth.
Yeah. I can't imagine what it's like to not be aware of the space you walk in and know that you have to own it because, and I think, they move away and they don't really think about your feelings. I mean, this has happened to us. We suddenly have all this room. I remember when we used to go for picnics when we were younger with mum and dad. So all the kids, 3 or 4 families would get up and move. So we would have all this space. We were like, oh, cool, here's the spot. But then we'd sort of see them on the other side. So they just moved on the other side. And I think that's that thing that that's what happened. And that.
But why?
They don't know us. Why are they doing that to us? If they knew us, they'd like us.
It's a mind, they all want to be us. I mean, they lie out in the sun and trying to get brown, dumba. It's like, me and my whānau went to the hot pools down the mounts in Tauranga. Yeah. There's a whole heap of us, tribe. We go there and it's always got lots of non-brown people in it. And you wouldn't get, we all laughed. We all walked in, go to hop in the pools. They all got out. It just cleared the whole pool. Yeah. And we were pissing ourselves laughing because, they're missing out on something really awesome.
Yeah.
Because of some fake moral thing that they have, that they don't want to sit in the pool with a whole lot of hories. But, we had a best time ever. Yeah. But, that stuff still hurts and it still sits in your brain. So we become a little bit angry and that's not our place. Angry doesn't get nothing done, Yeah. You set yourself, you think, this is how we're going to get there, but we're not going to get angry. We're not, we're just going to get even.
Yeah.
And I think
that's how we do it. Yeah. And I think that's when you can get sick too. So you make work and it comes out and your voice gets louder and louder until
and you do it in a positive way. I mean, that it's the system more than individual Pākehā or white people. And we have a lot of good allies who know their place. And I love reminding them that their place is here. You're on our whenua. We're mana whenua. This is your place. Our whakapapa goes back 21 generations, even further. Yours goes back 3 because your greasy old grandfather got someone in Hapu in England or stole a loaf of bread and they shipped your little ass over here, or to Australia.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you all ended up with all those little toe rag pox ridden, whatever they were.
Yeah.
We got some of them.
We got a lot of convicts.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm lucky enough to be hanging out with you two.
Oh, sorry, Lana, are you still there?
There's a couple of questions that have come in that I'll just throw to you, because believe it or not, we're in our final 10 minutes.
Oh, wow, that went quick.
Far out.
But
I'll make it afterwards.
Yeah.
Selena Britt is asking, what are you both working on at the moment, and if you can talk a little bit about that. And then I'm going to throw in another question to see if we can get these done at the same time, which is, oh, that's gone. Oh, it is. What is?
It's
from.
Wow.
There's just a question, which is, if you have words of encouragement that you would pass on to rangatahi about making art as activism, and that's from Alex Barnes.
Of course it is. Kia ora, Alex. I think always remember where you've come from, and that's the only time you're allowed to be angry and make art.
Yeah.
Make angry art. Because it's amazing. You know, people, I always say to young ones, you'll be amazed at what comes through, and from your tupuna, karakia, you know. But yeah, and it's always like, I paint now from angst. I've always, and my friend Nigel Burrell always said, well, you need a little bit of angst in your life, Linda. So I watch the news, then I get pissed off. That's not angst, you know. But it's just remembering how our people were treated. But that work you showed is so old. We've got, I'm in an exhibition at the moment with our queens, Robin Kahukiwa, Kura, Emere, all activists. It's called Women in Art, something, anyway, I've just forgotten, activism. So there's 12 of us in this exhibition. And yeah, we've got key activists, Taweras in there, myself, and it's a beautiful exhibition up in Auckland. So yeah, mine's more around, I've got a little bit of my grandmother in there. She died in childbirth from bad practices. And this is after being beaten up. You know, like my whole passion now is around ensuring that our women and children are safe with our refuge, you know, just generally in our community. So those paintings in that exhibition are around my nanas and how hard their lives were, because, you know, sometimes our men love going to the white side and they embrace drink and that whole Victorian notion around women only being good for breeding with and in the kitchen, you know, all of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, taking on another culture that didn't take care of our own wasn't good for us as well.
No.
And that culture didn't respect women and children. You know, my ancestors as well. So
yeah.
And to adopt those cultures, being forced into the dominant culture, it is really important to just go, no, that's not who our ancestors were.
Traditionally, yeah. I mean, when you're introduced to things like alcohol, drugs, tobacco, you know, those were the things that enticed our tāne, our men folk, that generation. And they thought it was just it was a better way to be, where women were subservient and children, you know. Yeah.
And I also wonder, is it part of the grief as well, you know? I sort of wonder how much they know as well, but how does it express? So, you know, there's a lot of questions, isn't there?
I think, and to teach our young ones too, because there's a lot of, you know, society now, expectations for them, especially around social media, you know, trying to live up to some fantasy that's on TikTok or, you know, Instagram, right. You know, and everyone uses those, what they call filters. They're ugly as fuck in real life, and then they put a filter on, ta-da! You know, but their expectations for them to look perfect, and then, you know, and with growing depression amongst our young ones, addiction, it's a real worry for our future. I worry about our kids, and I think that the arts is a good place to be, to start healing, you know, whether that's through all the genres, you know.
Yeah.
Did I answer your question, Alex?
I reckon you did. Dianne, what are you working on at the moment, and do you have advice for our sort of younger artists coming through?
I'm working on my PhD with my grandfather who shot a racist in 1955, and that's been a really tough journey because he had such a hard life, and I'm really curious about that point where you just go, I'm just going to do it. I'm over it. I've had it. But yeah, I can't help but agree with you, Linda, that this TikTok and all this kind of, a lot of this
bullshit.
Yeah, it's like fun, I guess.
It is, but
I like laughing. But at my core, I'm an Aboriginal person. I'm a Noongar Yok from Balladong, and I will never make a work that will ever offend my families, unless we have a really full-on discussion about it. But they're seeing it before anybody else does, and there are works that never get to go anywhere. And so I am a part of my group, and I check in with them. And if they tell me off, that's up to them. They have those rights. We have those arguments. That's fine. We can talk about it. We can come up with solutions. But I completely respect my elders, and it's the moment when you sit with them and you look at their faces and their eyes and you go, wow, you've lived a different life from me. And how did you do that? I can only learn from those quiet moments with those elders. And I just wish they were all around. The ones that have died, I wish they were still here. I still want to talk to them. So I think appreciating, we've got amazing elders, amazing histories. So TikTok, whatever, have a bit of fun, but just know who you are.
You figure out where the line between reality and fantasy kind of, stops. Hey,
right.
It's like, but no.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really sort of just sitting with this idea of the time that you have innocence and then the moment where you just need to pull the trigger, where you've done so much. And I think that's going to kind of sit with me for a long time. We are at 7:58, so I think that's an apt place to leave it, thinking about our rangatahi and our future artists / activists coming through. So I just want to acknowledge you again, Dianne and Linda and Kaikōrero, and everyone in the audience who hung out with us. I think this was probably a very great way to spend a Friday night. I wish I could sit here and listen to you both talk for a lot longer.